Welcome in to the Hot Read Podcast live here on Friday, February the 21st. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, writer and reporter here at the 440 Sports Podcast Network. You can follow me on Twitter at JT_Ruhnke, and I am joined on yet another Hot Read Happy Hour Friday by none other than my wonderful co-host, Stoney, Keeley, editor-in-chief of So Bros Network and co-writer over at Stacking the Inbox. Stoney, how are you doing? We are little less than, maybe 3-4 days away from the NFL Combine. How are you doing, my friend? And how is draft season treating you?
Can't wait, JT. It's been a busy week. I've got my first batch of evals like completely written and put in the draft guide. I'm done watching a stray game here and there for a prospect. It's time to get serious. We're gonna start wrapping some prospects up, but it's been long hours, man. I fell behind last week and had to cook up my Shador Sanders scouting report over on Stacking the Inbox. That thing's like a 12-minute video with a 3,000 word article to go with it. Then I turned around and did the Travis Hunter cornerback scouting report. That thing's like 2,300 words. It's like a 7-minute video or something like that. It's been nonstop. I'm back to drinking coffee in the evening and staying up until 1 a.m. I don't know if you saw my tweets last night at like 12:30 a.m. I'm tweeting about Brian Callahan finding a quarterback that can run quick game so he can implement it into his offense more often. So I'm like grind don't sleep season. I don't know if I'm going to make it to the draft. My heart might explode.
What's your preferred, like, is it just black coffee? Do you have like a K-Cup brand
cream.
that you like? You like cream in your coffee?
It's got to be dark roast. It's got to be like completely nuclear coffee. And then like the stuff that it'll make you grow hair on your chest kind of deal. And then I'm going to just dump a whole bunch of cream in it. No sugar, just cream.
Love to see it. I'm more of I can do coffee in the morning. I can't, like, after 4 o'clock for me, like that's no go. That's where I turn to like the Celsius or something like that.
Yeah.
That's where I start to get in the energy drinks for the day. But I'm right there with you, prepping for the NFL Combine, which starts next Monday and Tuesday. A reminder to all of you out there that we will be live every single day with appearances from Stoney, Keeley here back in Nashville. But I will be on the ground and on site in Indianapolis for the NFL Combine. Sure to be a exciting time, as the dog outside just absolutely threw me off there, but can't wait for it. Reminder to tune in. We'll shoot some, I guess, notifications out there from when we're going live, because it'll be a little different, as the Combine does. You start at 7 o'clock in the morning and then you're not really done until like 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. So it's going to be a grind, but we cannot wait to get down there. Myself and Braden Gall of the 440 Sports, as Stoney, you keep it locked down here in Nashville, and we appreciate you for doing that. Reminder, we are, if you want to join the conversation here on this lovely Hot Read Happy Hour Friday and you're watching on Twitter or Facebook, do us a favor and head on over to the 440 Sports YouTube channel, where you can join so many wonderful people like Cristoforo saying, "What's up, fellas?" Joey saying, "The star," of one of the other 440 Sports Network podcasts, Music City Audible, Stoney Keeley. I know you went on there. Be sure to check that one out after
Talk to the Justins this week.
Yes. Paul saying Stoney's Super Bowl time. Paul saying another Paul, two Pauls, Paul 2.0 here, saying, "Let's do this, fellas. Got the hat and the haircut." Stoney also says that you need to take some time for self-care here. Eddie saying pure black coffee is the way. Ramp up with that. White monsters in the afternoon. I like the espresso monsters. Those are some of my favorites. So that'll
make your heart explode.
And then Paul says, "Tell us about Travis Hunter, Stoney. No tech issues today." We'll get into Travis Hunter and what that means at the Combine and so much more, because we have, it'll be super exciting to get to talk to Brian Callahan and Mike Borgonzi on Tuesday, kind of find out where their heads are at, along with everyone else at the NFL Combine, and get to talk to said players like Travis Hunter, Shadur Sanders, Cam Ward, and so many more. We are sponsored by ML Rose, craft burgers and beer. 7 wonderful locations around the Nashville area. Also brought to you by Sinkers Beverages. Thank you to both of them for sponsoring the show. Gonna have to hit both of them up before I head out for Indianapolis. Maybe take a little care package with me for the late nights at in Indianapolis here. So can't wait to do that. More on them later, but thank you to ML Rose and Sinkers Beverages for sponsoring the show. And Stoney, before we talk about some potential cut candidates for the Tennessee Titans in the 2025 offseason, I do want to just point out one note that I think is kind of funny. The NFL is not slick. They think they can pull a fast one here on the Tennessee Titans media. They're not so slick here. And that's because I got the NFL Combine kind of schedule today. The big giant the email that they send out with all of the list of everything that's happening, when players are talking, when coaches are talking whatsoever. And of course, the first thing I do is I went to see what time on Tuesday I'll have to be there at the Indianapolis Convention Center to be talking to Brian Callahan and Mike Borgonzi. And of course, they will be speaking at 10:15 and 10:30 respectively. So be on the lookout for content from myself and many others down there, or up there, I should say, in Indianapolis. But after I got that done, I was like, I wonder when everybody else is talking. And it took me no more than another half a second to glance over to the left of where Brian Callahan is talking to see that the only other person who is going to be scheduled to speak on Tuesday at 10:15 is Mike Vrabel.
I love it.
Spicy. Very spicy indeed. I'm going, maybe I'll have to step back and before, Brian Callahan starts to speak, take a picture, because I think it's literally Mike Vrabel in between Brian Callahan and just take like, look at this. Isn't this kind of interesting? But, the NFL is trying to pull a fast one. They're trying to be a little spicy. And you know what? NFL, we see it. So I'm sure there will be a lot of clips and, things happening that day. Can't wait for that. Stoney, do you think they did that on purpose, or am I reading too much into this?
Absolutely. I don't care what Team Ramrod says in the comments. He says, I promise you the NFL doesn't care about Titans media. I think they have an axe to grind with Titans media, and they're going to twist the knife, make it as difficult as possible. That picture is going to do numbers. The picture of Brian Callahan and Mike Vrabel together is going to do numbers on Titans Twitter. I can't wait to see it. And I hope you get rich and famous off of it, JT. But the NFL knows what it's doing, because Titans media can't be in both places at the same time. Or actually, I guess they could technically. I don't know the layout of this thing if they're going to be literally next to one another. But
I would offer, or guess, I should say, that they will be no more than 10 feet away from each other.
So you could just shout your questions out from wherever you're standing.
Considering that there will only be 2 going at 10:15, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're dropping Easter eggs to Nashville. They know that nationally nobody's going to give a shit about this. They're going to be like, we just particularly want to screw with Nashville and Titans media.
I love it. And so that'll be super exciting. Yeah. My first question, which will lead perfectly into our discussion today, I'll be like, so Brian Callahan, what do you think about Jeffrey Simmons or Harold Landry? Are those players that you want to keep, or is there somebody who you might want to trade them to? That's what I'm going to do. That's my plan of attack.
I like
here.
it.
But yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today, because I think a lot of us in Titans media have started to like try to figure out what the Titans may do with some of the veterans that they have, some of these, I guess, free agents that they signed last year in the wake of Rand Carthon's spending spree, and players who have simply not worked out, and how much of that cap can they really get back to put towards this offseason and beyond. Of course, the Titans right now are sitting at $49,787,053 right now. I think that's good for 11th overall, somewhere between like 8 and 12 is where they are right now. So they're above average in terms of cap space that they have, but still, we talk a lot about already the potential quarterback options that may be out there for the Titans, in terms of if they draft a guy, if they don't draft a guy and sign a bridge quarterback, if they sign a bridge quarterback and draft a guy, the quarterback position is still one of the most lucrative, no matter who you are. I can remember just a couple of years ago with Mike Glennon getting like $10 million a year. Like quarterbacks will demand a pretty penny of this $49 million that the Titans have, and so they need to bring in some competition, which means I do think that they're going to cut some of these guys that have been around here for a while. It would, I think, behoove them in this new era with this new regime to really kind of blow it up a little bit, build the team that you want to build through this draft, develop, and retain model. There's a lot of guys who that the old regimes have drafted, developed, and retained on second and third contracts now. And that's basically it. There's nothing after the third step of retain. After that, it's go on your merry way, And I do think that that's, as maybe hard as it is for Titans fans to hear, like that's just the business of the NFL and the business of what a team like the Packers or Chiefs do. And with Chad Brinker and Mike Borgonzi being here, I think we're going to see some turnover that people might disagree with, Stoney.
Yeah, I'm with you, JT. I'm really curious to see how this front office, this coaching staff kind of views the acquisitions that Rand Carthon made an offseason ago, because I think there are some dispensable pieces. And listen, man, the more I get into the study of this roster and I look at this free agent class and I look at this draft class, I'm kind of coming around on the idea that this team is just kind of in a hole right now that I don't know they can dig out of quickly. And if that's the mindset, if they're looking at it like we've just really got to tear this thing down and rebuild it, I think it is possible that they could kind of clean house on some of these guys that are aging vets in this system, that are guys that were signed last year that were injured or maybe underperformed. I don't know. Now, I do think that it's an interesting spot to be in, because I don't think, because of this free agency class, unless they're going to spend, if they're going to spend big money on a quarterback acquisition like Sam Darnold, I just wonder what the sense of urgency really is to clear up cap space and gain cash to go shopping in free agency, because it's not a class that's loaded at positions that they greatly need that are worth the value. So I think it'll be interesting, but I definitely think there are some players on this roster that could save this team a lot of money that people aren't really, either they don't want to hear it or they're just not thinking about it right now, but could be cap casualties.
Yeah, and I agree exactly. There's a fine line, I think, between getting some of that money back to kind of put towards younger players, getting younger and saving for the future when it really is time to go all in, versus the idea that, okay, even though it might make sense right now to cut them, does that create another hole that you potentially need to fill on your roster?
Yeah.
With a lot of these veterans, I think that's the fine line that you're walking. You have to weigh, between what young guns do you have in terms of depth already at that position versus, what is that money worth it right now? In the terms of, say, one of the biggest free agent acquisitions that they could do is in terms of getting a deal done with a guy like Sam Darnold, who most likely is going to cost somewhere around $30 to $35 million a year on that deal. Not saying that will all go towards the cap. There are ways to make signing bonuses and workarounds and push some of that money down further, but like if you're going to take that route, right, that's going to take up a lot of your cap space this season. And so with still so many holes. I think, we've had this discussion all the time. I think there's more holes than not on this team. Maybe you've had the idea that they may be building something a little closer to being back in contention. But either way, like there's simply not enough money right now, at least for the Titans, even with the cap going up, right? For them to go out and get a guy like Sam Darnold and also fill some needs in free agency. And so that's what we can get into here to start off. We're going to basically, I think this exercise, and we'll be using Spot Track and their new managing system to kind of look through some of these things here, which I have handy. We'll go through some of these veterans who, we'll basically ask the question. We'll bring them up. We'll talk about their impact over the last year or so. And honestly, we'll give our opinions of should they be a cap casualty or should they continue with this rebuild. And if you guys want to join in on the comment section here on the 440 Sports YouTube channel, feel free to head on over there and join the conversation. And the first guy I want to talk about, which I think maybe is one of the easier ones to talk about, is Kenneth Murray.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting one, but ultimately I think we can get to the same conclusion here. 27 years old, still young, right? Like he's not he wouldn't be cut because he's an aging guy, but from the get-go on, that 2-year, $15 million deal that he kind of got, right? I think from the beginning, it was a bad deal. And when we got to training camp and preseason and the start of the season, it continued to be a bad deal. As we got through the season, it was a bad deal. Like the red flags that we all put out there when the Titans were making these free agency signings. Like I remember where I was when Kenneth Murray was signed, and I said, "Oh, this is a bad deal," and it continues to be a bad deal. And so, Kenneth Murray, obviously. It depends what you think of like a guy like Otis Reese. It depends on your opinion of bringing back a guy like Jack Gibbons or Luke Gifford. Depends what you think about James Williams and what Cedric Gray can be going forward. But if you were to release Kenneth Murray, your cap, according to Spot Track, would move from the $49 million that we discussed right now to 57. So you'd be saving around give or take, let's see, you would save around $7 million if you were to get rid of Kenneth Murray. Is that something that you're doing? I think I would. I think that's a move that they most likely are already thinking about and is one I think they should make because there are better options out there in free agency, even though it's not a sexy position of need, right? It's one of the less valuable positions, off-ball linebacker, but the talent out there is unquestionably some of the deepest in the free agency market. So in my opinion, I think I'm moving on, saving that $7 million, $7.4 million, and looking for maybe not a younger option, but someone who can fit in with the scheme better.
Yeah, that's why, like, I'm looking at Nick Bolton, and I don't think I've ever believed a word that Chad Forbes has said, but selective hearing, I just see that he tweets the Titans will pursue Nick Bolton, and I'm just going to take it and run with it. I'm a big Nick Bolton fan, especially playoff Nick Bolton. It's just fantastic linebacker. But just one example, one illustration of your point that I think there are, I don't know that I would necessarily say deeper, better options for the same price as what they're paying Kenneth Murray. But I think there are guys that probably do a lot more things than Kenneth Murray does. I'm with you. The Kenneth Murray signing was kind of jarring, was not one that I expected them to make. And I think over the course of the summer, at least, I don't want to speak for you or anybody else, but I had to kind of talk myself into the Kenneth Murray signing to see a vision for it. Like, well, in this particular scheme with what they're asking him to do, he's a pretty effective linebacker. I kind of feel like the defensive coaching staff likes Kenneth Murray a little more than we do and fans do. So I might be a little hesitant to say, yeah, he's automatically cut, because I think they might like him inside of the building for the role that he's in. But you factor in the injuries, the limitations to his playing style. I mean, yeah, he was really good as like the heat-seeking missile linebacker that could fill a gap, break through, and tackle the running back. And I do think that we saw the run defense kind of suffer without him a little bit. But for that price, the money that you could save, that you could allocate elsewhere, and also looking back at, well, what does this front office think about the guys that were signed last offseason? I think you could probably make a pretty strong argument for doing like you said and just cutting him, getting the money, and probably getting a more well-rounded linebacker in that spot.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And it seems like a lot of people in the comment section here agree. Cristoforo saying Murray needs to be cut. Coach Will saying getting outplayed by Gibbons. We need to bring in someone new. Also saying underappreciated position in football, but for the Titans, we've had holes at the linebacker position for the last few years. You know, the last really decent linebacker was David Long Jr. on his first rookie deal, right? And we've seen how that's gone. So it wasn't, David Long Jr.'s longevity it has been in question there. So, it's hard to see the last time the Titans have had like a field general in the middle of the line. And I know, I feel like Jack Gibbons was potentially for that role under the Vrabel regime. We talked a lot about how Cedric Gray could have maybe been, kind of brought under his wing to be that guy. As Drew says here in the comments, the Cedric Gray situation continues to be one of the biggest head scratchers for me. Loved his UNC tape. Still can't figure out why he was a special teams only guy. I will, push back on that and say it's hard for him to really find a role in the defense when you missed all of training camp and you didn't come back until the last 4 weeks of the season. Like, it's hard. So, like I said, we don't know what Cedric Gray can be yet for this team. I was one of the many people who also liked Cedric Gray. I know we all like Cedric Gray on our draft live stream. There was early talk about when they drafted him. Yes, green dot guy. This is going to be your guy. And, almost a year removed from that, I don't think that's could be any less certain that Cedric Gray can be that green dot guy. And so whether it is through free agency or through the draft, I think they have to continue churning at that position one way or another. And I think that also starts with releasing Kenneth Murray, because I think that experiment has run its course. Joey says we should go after that Ernest Jones guy. I hear he's pretty good.
It's a free agent.
He is a free agent. That would be one of the biggest brain moves there, right? Like, bring him in, like trade for him, get a better pick, trading him away, like upgrade your pick and then still re-sign him. Like, I'm in on bringing a guy like Ernest Jones back. I think he was their best linebacker, and I think he played really good ball in the Denard Wilson system. So,
I think Ernest Jones IV is probably a better Kenneth Murray than Kenneth Murray. So
yes,
you sign him, you cut Kenneth Murray, and then you go get Nick Bolton, and then boom, you got it's pretty good inside linebacking duo.
Team Ramrod also says using one of these extra second round picks on Carson Schwessinger is gonna hit like crack. I'm assuming when they trade back. It'll be interesting to talk about this linebacker class. I think it's an interesting one that
I do too.
I think there's more solid day two talent in this draft than there was last year. Like last year you had like the top 4 who were like day 2 guys, and then the drop off was like pretty big. But I think like you have a nice crop of guys who will go on day 2. For me and saying, please no more green dot questions. We'll try to refrain from that.
I do want to say something to Coach's point. Speaking my language about the inside linebacker position, I think it's an undervalued position in the NFL. People say it doesn't matter, but then if you go get a Fred Warner, a Dre Greenlaw, a Roquan Smith, look at the difference it makes for your defense.
Yeah.
It's just those guys aren't really out there readily available every cycle, but justice for the inside linebacker position.
Yeah, I agree with you there. So I think we can all agree, just like Joey Turner says, that, Kenneth Murray has been a disappointing signing. It's one that we saw straight from the jump. We thought
Mhm.
was not going to work out. It hasn't. And I feel pretty comfortable moving on. Here's another one that I think is really interesting, and Team Ramrod brings him up. He brings up that he feels like Cheeto might get axed. I think that's a really interesting one. And this one's different from a Kenneth Murray, in my opinion, right? Chidobe Awuzie has 7 years of experience. He's going to be 30 this upcoming season. But his dead cap hit is going to be a lot more than what cutting a Kenneth Murray. So, if you were going to release a guy like Cheeto, you'd really only be saving a little under $2 million towards the cap. Obviously, that's where we could get into the discussion between a post/pre June 1st cut. I believe if you were to cut him post June 1st, I think you could save a little bit more money. But that's like we say, like we had this discussion last year and the year before that, right? If you're designating a guy as a post June 1st cut, you have to have the replacement already in place. You're not releasing that guy to then go find the option, right? Because all the options are gone in normal free agency. So now I think there's something to be said, right? Is there a possibility that an avenue where you get a guy like Cheeto, get younger at the position, and your top 2-ish could be a L'Jarius Sneed, a Jarvis Brownlee Jr., and Roger McCree on the inside with a trade down, and you get Travis Hunter? Like that is an option, I think. But ultimately, I think Cheeto did a lot for the locker room in Brian Callahan's first year. I think his veteran presence is something that, as much as Kenneth Murray was a leader, like I think currently at that position, it's something you can afford to say, we're going to keep this guy around because, maybe the play is average, standard at the cornerback position, but what he does in the locker room means a lot. Whereas Kenneth Murray means a lot in that locker room, but the play is just nowhere near what you want to pay for that guy. And so I'd be okay with keeping Cheeto and running it back. Now, I know, obviously, injury prone, that's a big concern, right? It's kind of baked in that he probably is going to miss time, but unlike last year, I think you now have some proven guys in that room. A Jarvis Brownlee Jr., a Darrell Baker Jr., who you could bring back as well as solid depth, where I think you can bridge that, along with probably with one of these picks in maybe day 3, going out and getting another guy for the secondary. Like, I think that's, I think it's worth keeping him around.
Yeah, I don't know about this one. I mean, honestly, like, I don't have strong feelings either way, because there's still the other side of that argument, JT, is that, well, you kind of got along just fine without him last year. And if you're in a position where you really are just blowing things up and starting over, you might as well try and get what you can for the guy to uptick your resources that you have to do some team rebuilding. I like Cheeto. I was stoked about the signing, but the injury thing does concern me quite a bit. I think corner is a sneaky need for this team. I think at the very least, they could stand to add another young corner that has starter potential to go along with Jarvis Brownlee. You think about it, if Sneed and Cheeto both start petering out, then you'd at least have your next generation of guys ready to step up, and Brownlee and, say, Quincy Riley out of Louisville. I'm a big fan of his. Yep. Darian Porter out of Iowa State is another guy. Kobe Bryant out of Kansas that might be there and might be potential scheme fits for what Denard Wilson wants to run. So I think it would be advantageous to add some youth to the room, regardless of what they do with Cheeto. So in a way, it kind of feels like they're playing with house money in this situation. Either they're going to save a little bit of money or they're going to keep one of their locker room leaders on defense.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. If he was a post-June first cut, it looks like you would save around another $2 million here. So, you're not gaining that much. So I think it does become this question, right? How much of, as Coach Wills brings up here in the chat, he was supposed to be a bridge culture guy for Brian Callahan, but was never available. How much can he still continue to be that bridge guy after Brian Callahan has a year under his belt? Like, has he served his need here in Tennessee? That's one of the questions I think you can pose. But at the end of the day, you can never have too many cornerbacks, as we saw last year, right? We thought that they would be deep, and then we see them continuing to lose more guys. Kenneth also brings up here in the comments, good to see you, Kenneth. Safety is the hole that he keeps staring at instead of corner. It's Amani Hooker and who? That's going to be a big one. We talked earlier this week, or maybe last week, as Cristoforo brings up here. Bringing a guy like Quandre Diggs back, I think, is almost a must, in my opinion. I think from his locker room fit to the scheme fit, even though he is on the wrong side of 30, I do think that he brings value there, and you can probably get him for relatively cheap considering his age. But I don't know. Final verdict on a guy like Cheeto, I'd be okay with bringing him back, considering what happened last year, and you can never have too many cornerbacks.
Yeah, I mean, my final verdict is I don't really care either way. So.
Okay, so we'll keep him, which brings us to a guy we just mentioned, and we got a couple comments about him on Tuesday's show. There's no world where you would cut Amani Hooker. Like, that was a question that was brought up. Like, I know that he is a guy that you potentially could release. If anything, I think I'm giving him an extension because of the need and what he's brought to your team. Obviously in year one with Denard Wilson, had a career high in interceptions, was a guy who was kind of driving that offense and kind of sparked their ability to finally get turnovers in week 4 or 5 or something, 6 or something like that, like where they just could not get anything going. He was one of the guys who finally sparked them and got them going in the positive direction with the turnover differential. He's a guy that I'm not even thinking about cutting now. His cap hit, he's 27 years old. He has a cap hit of 11.1 million. He's got 1 year left on that deal. That's the guaranteed money, 11.1. I'd be in the business that if you wanted to move his money around somehow, you extend him. Like, this is a guy who has continued to be productive for you. He's been a guy who for the last season and a half, 2 seasons, has been healthy. Like, this is a guy you can depend on, and I think he would be rewarded as such.
Yeah, I agree. I thought he played really well in 2024. One of those sad cases that happens when the team's bad, where a guy's playing really well, probably deserves more love for stuff like the Pro Bowl, the All-Pro voting, that sort of stuff. Didn't get it because the team was so bad, but he played really well. And right now, I don't know what the Titans have at safety outside of Amani Hooker. Like, the future is really shaky. It's really uncertain at that position. That's another place where they need to get younger. They need to start thinking about a development plan for the future. But if you cut Amani Hooker, and you're really you're in a tough spot for 2025. Yeah. And maybe this is a regime that's finally ripping the Band-Aid off, and they're just going to be okay with sucking for quite some time as they rebuild. But to me, I'm not going to rule it out completely, because I do think that this could be a situation where they just blow it all up, and you're looking for any way to save money, any way to make changes, provide a spark. I don't know. That's the only justification I could have for getting rid of Amani Hooker and moving on. But I'm in the same boat as you. Like, he's a guy that's still playing football at a high level. I would not want to create a massive hole on my defense by doing this, when this is a guy that can probably still play well for a couple years beyond his contract.
Yeah, I agree here. Kenneth asks, Stoney, would you be interested in pairing Amani Hooker with a guy like Andrew Makuba out of Texas?
I like him. I haven't finished my my tape study on him just yet. The safeties are usually one of the last groups that I get to because it's really I hate watching safety tape. It's like 8
You're either
plays of them
good or
just
you're not.
8 plays of them just dropping back into the zone and nothing happening. You're
Yeah.
just fast forwarding, like waiting for a safety to do something, and then boom, there's a big play or something like that. So I haven't gotten around to the group as a whole just yet.
Yes. Drew also saying Jonas Saker, an early mid day 3 box safety, Malik Vernon as a more athletic coverage guy. A lot of guys who I think they will be taking a safety on day 3. Like I'm very confident
Good.
in saying that. Like it's a deep class where you can find some
Mhm.
developmental guys. You certainly need one, as Eddie brings up. They already lost Molden for pennies on the dollar, who now has a
Oh my
shiny
god.
new contract. We can maybe touch on that. People were telling me that I was crazy and that I was almost trolling for saying that Ran trading Molden away was probably one of the reasons that honestly did him in, was like
Yeah.
just kind of stacked on top. People thought I was crazy for saying that. Uh, I've considering that they chose Jamal Adams over a Elijah Molden, who probably is what 4 or 5 years younger than him. Elijah Molden has a career year. Like I think you can't keep giving away these guys and getting pennies on the dollar. You have to start bringing them in at some point. And I think with this new regime, you're going to see them at least take 1 or maybe 2 swings on day 3 at the safety position here. Let's see what else we have. We have Team Ramrod saying Hunter Wohler is going to be one of the guys that plays for a decade, and this is a defensive coordinator like 3 years later. Very, very interesting. I haven't watched a lot of him yet, but one of the guys who they could be in on, and late day 2, early day 3.
I like the name
But
Eddie brought up, Dan Jackson out of Georgia. That dude is like
let white boy cook.
that dude is a missile. He is like a walking targeting call waiting to happen. But man, plays the game with some real physicality. Would be a nice little compliment to Amani Hooker as the developmental guy.
Yeah, I agree. Mr. Cardinals in the chat here saying Billy Bowman is a younger Diggs. Like there are going to be options, and I think
There's guys.
I think that's the ultimate route they take. But at the bottom line, you're not even thinking about releasing Amani Hooker. I think that would be a stunner of a move, and I'd be truly asking what they're building in there in the building, and then we can move on from there. Or at the very least, I think I'd be one of the first people pounding on the table to say extend this guy if you wanted to move his money around at all. We can move on. There's 2 more guys I want to talk about before we get into some draft talk and talk maybe some pre-combine thoughts. But before we do that, have to give a shout out to our sponsors, ML Rose Craft Beer and Burgers. 7 wonderful locations all around the greater Nashville area, including Capitol View, Melrose 8th Ave, Gallatin, Sylvan Park, Mount Juliet, which we may be in talks to maybe do a draft show there yet. I don't know.
Oh, how about that?
Could be very interesting down the pipe. Along with Franklin and another location coming soon to East Nashville near Inglewood. It's so easy to see why ML Rose has so many locations and is so popular, because the food is just so good. I mean, their appetizers are absolutely unbeatable. Anything you want. The pretzel bites, the loaded waffle fries, the fried pickles and peppers, the Nashville hot cheese curds, like cannot go wrong. Pair them with one of their 25 beers that they have on tap. And of course, you got to try their burger of the month, as the month is close to ending. We're getting very close to the end of February, and you only have about a week and change to try their February burger of the month, the El Jefe burger with that cream cheese, jalapeno jam, bacon on a brioche bun. It's delicious. Cannot wait to get back out there. I probably have to get there this weekend before I go to Indianapolis, because then I'll be just missing it, because Indianapolis, it has some good spots, but like if you just want like a burger, like if you're hungry and you're just like really craving a burger or something in Indianapolis during Combine Week, there's like no options. Like that's
Damn.
one of the tough ones there. Maybe I'm missing them out. If someone knows a good recommendation for a burger in Indianapolis, reach out to me. I'd be interested. But gonna have to get there. And then when I get back, it's a new month, which means they'll have a new burger of the month. Maybe they'll finally take us up on our offer of the Mike Borgonzi burger, which I'm not letting die. But thank you
I'm
to
with you.
ML Rose for sponsoring the show. Also, shout out to Sinkers Beverages, who also sponsored the show. Located in East Nashville, a 4-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year. It's easy to see why, because they simply have the best selection of beer, wine, and spirits in the Nashville area. Check them out at sinkersbeverages.com. Kenneth says here in the comments he would love a mailbag question show at ML Rose. Talk football and eat burgers.
I would love that.
I'll let him know. I'll let him know. We'll
Would
run
love
it up.
that.
We'll run it up through the ranks here and see what we can do. But nevertheless, Stoney, we can jump right back in. Actually, real quick, Ed Henry has a good comment here. He says, Brinker mentioned having 7 high impact guys, core guys. Would you put Hooker in that group?
Man,
like yes, but also no, because I like safety is not a high impact position, right? So like I feel like by default he gets left out. But like if it was, I think Hooker is one of those guys.
I don't know, JT. I do kind of feel like when you play at a really high level, you can impact
It
a
doesn't
game.
matter. Like
Yeah,
position wise.
but I think the thing that limits him is probably his age at this point. Like,
Yeah.
yes, he's a high impact player for this defense, but would you consider him like a building block for the long-term future of the team? That's kind of what I'm looking at when I want those like 7 high impact guys. I'm thinking like JC Latham, like Tavondre Sweat, some of the guys that still have some upside. And I know Hooker has a high floor. He's playing really well right now, but it also kind of feels like we're starting to approach the territory with him where it's like Father Time is undefeated. And at any minute, it feels like the rug could be pulled out from under him. So I don't know. I'm gonna say yes. I'm gonna consider him that for now, but I don't know how long he's going to be in that role.
Yeah, I agree with you here. This one should be really easy, and I've already put him underneath the cap casualty. You can save $3.2 million by cutting Nicholas Petit-Frere. Like,
Oh man.
I'm doing it. Send him on his way. Have
Yeah.
happy trails in your new fantasy football job. Like, I'm done with the experiment. They're gonna get a new guy anyways. You can save. I mean, saving $3.2 million on a guy like Nicholas Petit-Frere, I think, is pretty good. So Stoney,
You don't even have to go ahead. I'm sorry.
Are you going to push back on that at all, or are we in agreement there?
No, I was going to say, like, you don't even have to replace him. Just get rid of him. I mean,
I agree.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, no. Coach Will says Bill Callahan already pulled the playbook from him. Yeah, I think that's one of the easiest ones. So currently we have Kenneth Murray and Nicholas Petit-Frere as potential cap casualties. I would say yes on here, which leads us to the biggest one. And I put this out here on Twitter yesterday, and it certainly ruffled some feathers. But I said, and I quote, let me pull it up. If anyone is saying Harold Landry shouldn't be a cut candidate for the Titans because of his 9 sacks in 2024, I'm not sure that you really watched Harold Landry play last season. The play strength just simply isn't there anymore, even in the year after the year from that ACL injury. Not to mention, I think he lacks the fit that Denard Wilson is looking for in this scheme, in his defense, even though he is 29. Like, I think you need to get younger at the position, much, much younger. You don't have a guy who just has unrelenting power and force on that edge. And with that, I'm going to just come out and say it, and I'll open it up for discussion here. Harold Landry is a cut candidate for me. I think he should be cut from this team. You know, even though Coach Wills, and I get this, right? Mike Borgonzi and Chad Brinker have praised the guys who have been drafted, developed, and retained, and, you know, are loyal to this team, as he says. It contradicts that plan. Same with Simmons and Landry. But at some point, like I said earlier in the show, You draft them, you develop them, and you retain them. And when they finally no longer are making the impact worth their dollar, you have to get rid of them. And whether it is trying to trade them, trying to trade a guy like Landry, and I know people are in the comments here talking about potentially a 3rd round pick for Landry. I think that's a little rich. I don't know if you're going to be able to get a day 2 pick. Like I said, maybe Mike, do you want Harold Landry for a day 2 pick? We'll see what he says. But in my opinion, like, there's no more guaranteed money on his contract. Like, paying, I think if you were to cut him pre June 1st, you would be saving, you would save $10.9 million towards your cap. And so, like, if we took the 3 guys that at least I'm saying yes to here, Harold Landry, Kenneth Murray, and MPF, you go from that $49 million in cap space to $71 million. That's a lot. That's a lot of cap to work with. Bring in guys who can still make an impact, who are younger and can still put you in the green to go all in on a future class at positions of need. For me, I think Harold Landry, I think he's been a great Titan. But unfortunately, I've said this since the last game of the season against the Texans. Like, he had a sack and a half in that game or something. And I said, that's most likely the last time we see Harold Landry in a Tennessee Titans uniform. I've stuck by it. This is not a new opinion of mine, but I think he's just outweighed what that contract is worth.
So a couple of things I want to get to, JT, because you're speaking my language here. You were spitting right now. The draft, develop, and retain thing. If you think about the average trajectory of a career in the NFL, draft, develop, retain. You draft a guy, you've got him for about 4 years, retain him, give him that second contract, which is where we see most NFL players make the bulk of their money throughout their career. You sign him to like a 3 or 4 year deal or 4 or 5 year deal or something like that. By the time you get to that point, why there's nothing after the retain is because if you get to the end of that second contract, the guy's probably been playing in the NFL for 8 or 9 years at that point. And if you let him go, then you're getting ahead of his decline. So that's why I think the draft, develop, and retain is particularly important, because you're holding on to the player for the best part of their career. So after that second contract, yeah, you don't want to draft, develop, retain, and retain, and retain. You just let him go after that. So I think it's a smart strategy. I feel like that's where we're at with Harold Landry and all this too. And I know he wasn't drafted by this current regime, but man, if you just watch the tape this season, I'm with you.
It was not good.
I have appreciated what Harold Landry has done for this organization at a certain point in his career. I really thought he was going to take the step needed to become a real edge one in the NFL and become a game wrecker. But regardless, he played a lot of good football, good solid football for this team for a long time. But if I were to go back and listen to the podcast that we recorded throughout the season, read the articles that I wrote throughout the season, I bet I wouldn't even know Harold Landry is on this team still. And I didn't even catch myself doing that. It wasn't like a conscious thing, but I very rarely found him to pop on tape. And you see issues with the play strength, the speed kind of slowing down. I feel like he gets kind of washed out. He doesn't have a real good sense of power anymore. It really feels to me like this is a case where Father Time has poked his head inside the door and said, "Hey, buddy, it's time to go." You know, it's not an easy situation for a player that has played his whole career in one market that this fan base still loves, obviously, from the reaction to your simply suggesting Harold Landry as a cut candidate on Twitter.
I said, like, he should be in the conversation. I didn't say that they would or they have to. I said he should be in the conversation, and it makes sense why he should be there, from the lack of play strength and the fact that, like, you know, you talk about, you know, Drew saying that you could get a later day 3 pick for him. To be honest, a team like Washington or Detroit needs a 3rd or 4th rotational guy.
That's where
Like,
he's
that's
at.
what Harold Landry is. And if
That's
you're
where he's
paying
at.
him right now on, like, if he's gonna be worth like $17 million, like, you're not paying $17 million for a third or fourth edge. And I know Kenneth says, like, if they take quarterback at 1 and cut Landry, where's the pressure coming from? It wasn't there already. Like, what's the difference, right? Like, I
Yeah,
think you can still go and find a guy in the second round, like a Princely Imanmielen. Like, there's going to be a bunch of options there that the team may like, that I think just being younger is going to be able to get after the quarterback a lot more effectively than what Harold Landry did this
yeah.
past year.
I think it's a really good draft class for edge rusher. I think it's also a pretty decent free agent class for edge rusher. And I've
Right.
said on this show before, if they're going to spend money on a big ticket free agent, to me, that's the position that you do it on. And maybe you bring in a Josh Sweat
I was gonna say
from,
his previous AAV is gonna be was around 10 million. Like,
yeah,
I'd be okay with paying around the 17, 18 million that you were gonna give Harold Landry for Josh Sweat, who's 2 years younger and just won a Super Bowl and was dominant throughout his playoff run. Like,
yeah. I mean,
I'd sign up for that.
that's the vision, is just improving the edge presence. And you need to do that because Landry just wasn't much of a factor in 2024. It's that simple. I know the golden days, the glory days, that's what I'm looking for. The glory days. I get it. Hey, we love our Titans. We pick our guys and we hold on to them as fans, but and it's kind of, it's time. Like, you gotta know when it's time to let go and move on. And I feel like we're at that point with Landry.
Yeah, I agree. And Eddie says the one play that you can probably remember was the safety against the Texans in that game where they won. Like, he had one play all season, and I know he had 9 sacks. And I think this is something that maybe I got to give Zach Lyons his flowers on, who continued to call Harold Landry a cleanup artist last year. And I
Yeah.
said, no, he's better than that. It's kind of what he's become. And you can't look at the 9 sacks that he had this year and say he's still worth that price point. Like that, at that point, we're just box score scouting to box score scout, right? Uh, I don't know. So that's where I'm at on Harold Landry. I'm of the mind that they would do well to move on and restart the cycle at edge. I know, I think Ed Henry said here in the comments, what would the maybe cutting a guy like Arden Key as well? If you were to do that, designating him as a pre-June 1st cut, you would be saving around $2.4 million. I maybe you do that, but at the end of the day, like, I think you have to keep one of them. In my opinion, I think they serve the same purpose at this point in their careers, so I'd keep the cheaper option in Arden Key right now. And that's where that's where my mind is headed on a guy like Harold Landry.
I kind of feel like they want to give Arden Key a go in the role that they think he should be in, right? We've heard him
Yeah.
talk about him being kind of miscast, like an edge presence that has to be out there as an edge setter, defending the run, that sort of thing. And that's not really his forte, but he was kind of thrust into that role, like the full-time edge rusher, defensive end, do it all guy, because they didn't have anybody else to fill the role. So I feel like if they add a couple of guys that can do that, I feel like the staff is going to want to get a look at Arden Key where they feel he's most likely to succeed, and that's as a situational, line him out wide, get after the quarterback, plain and simple kind of pass rusher. I don't think they're going to be so willing to part with Arden Key right off the bat.
Yeah, I agree with you there. So that kind of wraps up. Is there anyone else on your radar, Stoney, before we move on, that you would potentially consider a cap candidate, or cut candidate, I should say? Cap casualty, whatever alliteration you want to use. I think those are the three big ones for me. MPF is a given. Kenneth Murray, I would go and find a younger, or younger, like a better option. I'll just say it outright, a better option. And Harold Landry, I would want to get younger at that position. Those are the three guys that I'd be okay cutting. And when you look at those guys, if you were to designate them as pre-June 1st, you go from 49 million in cap space to 71.3. I think that's a number that if you wanted to kind of take a bridge quarterback and go that route, and you could still sign a guy like Sam Darnold and make that up in the aggregate and still have 40 million-ish to play with, right? Like, I think that's an option that you could go with.
I just want to say, as we wrap this up, I would be absolutely stoked to see what this pass rush would look like if they went into the season with Abdul Carter, Josh Sweat, Arden Key, and Jalen Harrell. I think that's a pretty intriguing group.
It'd be a very intriguing group.
And you just add to it every year, add a couple guys every year. Just keep it going.
Right. It's the Philadelphia Eagle method, right? You don't stop because you're done. You keep you stay greedy. You keep getting guys. And if you were to do that, like have Josh Sweat on a 3-4 year deal at, I don't know, $17-18 million right there, guarantee him that longevity. If he can still play, then we have hit the Harold Landry conversation with him 2 or 3 years down the road. Abdul Carter, you develop him. You see what Jalen Harrell has. You have Arden Key there already as a rotational guy. And then you continue to build on that. And that's how the good defensive teams stay good, is that you stay greedy and you have to build that foundation. I just don't think you're going to be able to build that foundation with $17.5 million or so going against the cap, keeping Harold Landry around just because he wants to be a Titan and he's loyal.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly.
That's where I stand on it. So I think that's going to do it for our conversation on, should they cut him? Should they keep him? Ultimately, those are the 3 guys I think are the biggest cap casualties that could be on the block here. Harold Landry, Kenneth Murray, and Nicholas Petit-Frere. Those are the 3 guys I want to, which leads us to our conversation now of the guys that they could potentially bring in the 2025 draft. And that obviously starts at the NFL Combine, which kicks off this Tuesday. I'll be on the road headed to Indianapolis on Monday. Gonna get up there, get all situated. Probably check out the Pacers game. I saw that you can get into the Indiana Pacers game against the Denver Nuggets for $7. And I said, sign me up. I was like, all right, if I can watch Nikola Jokic like for $7, I'm there. And so that'll be exciting. But we will get to talk to Brian Callahan and Mike Borgonzi on Tuesday. And I just wanted to have a conversation here, 4 minutes as we wrap up here, talking about what are some of the biggest questions we want answered by this regime during their media availability. And one of the biggest ones, which I think has kind of fallen to the wayside, is what's the plan with wide receiver, right? You bring in a guy like Chad Brinker and Mike Borgonzi, 2 organizations they come from that really have been selective in the ways they find their wide receivers. Green Bay just refusing to take a first-round wide receiver. The Chiefs always seeming to find value amongst the misfit toys. Obviously, you look at what's on the roster right now: Calvin Ridley, Bryce Oliver, Jaquan Jackson. That's not going to cut it. So that's one of the biggest questions for me. Is that going to be a emphasis in free agency? Is this draft class one that's interesting to you? Those types of questions, I think, are going to be one of the biggest ones to answer that I want Brian Callahan and Mike Borgonzi to answer, because I simply just don't really know what direction this team is going to do or go to address the wide receiver room.
Yeah, and I feel like just about every position group we pivot to, it just feels like it gets more and more bleak. It's like we start to look around and realize, oh my God, they need so much. They need so much.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I keep saying. Like we think we've made progress here with this roster, and then you just continue to look around and you're like, oh, but you need this, but you need that. Like there's so many things that this team could use to get them back on track. And so I think wide receiver is one. Obviously, we talked during the entire Senior Bowl week that this class of wide receivers is nowhere near what last year's was, maybe even the year before. I know that was one of my hottest takes, that I think this is probably the weakest wide receiver class we've seen in the last 3 years. It's going to be interesting to see how they address this position, but that's one of the questions I'm most eager to ask them. Stoney, do you have a question that you think you need addressed by Brian Callahan and Mike Borgonzi this upcoming week?
Well, I think the wide receiver question is a good one. And I would also like to point out, it's funny, we keep saying like, well, they could get the receiver at 35. 35 is a great spot for their right tackle. 35 is a great spot for an edge rusher if you take a quarterback at number 1 overall. Like, they're only going to get to make one pick at 35. We
Yep.
can't, there's just so much that they need. I think my question would be on this track, what I can't help but think about is how much we've heard Mike Borgonzi talk about speed in a wide receiver. So is this a case, like from a scouting standpoint, are you just strictly looking at the 40 time? Is the 40 time something that we really need to be paying attention to, particularly in some of the later round value wide receiver picks? You know, I think about guys like Ty Felton out of Maryland. I like him quite a bit. What's he going to run? If he runs a really good 40, should we put him on the radar for the Titans? Is that a guy that we should pay a little more attention to? I would be kind of curious to gain some insight into how this front office views speed.
Yeah, certainly looking at Mike Borgonzi, who comes from the Chiefs, who drafted Xavier Worthy last year, right? Like,
Yeah.
Rashee Rice also performed very, very well at his 40 time. You talk about Hollywood Brown, who, you know, outside of the injury is another speedster on the outside. Like, that's, I think, is a very interesting one. The final one, I think that is going to be very, very interesting, which kind of keeps us on this wide receiver. Maybe that's what we need to, we look past the quarterbacks, we look past the trade backs. What are we going to do at the wide receiver position? And there's one guy who could play wide receiver, who could play corner. And I think one of the biggest questions I have is, what does this regime think about Travis Hunter? Like, that is one of the most polarizing prospects still for me, considering our discussion about maybe moving on from Awuzie, maybe looking to bring him in. What role could he play in this offense if he was to be majority a wide receiver or a corner or vice versa? Like, that's one I think that is super interesting. And I know you have I guess 2 tapes coming out on Hunter, the wide receiver, Hunter, the corner.
Yep.
Is there anything that they could say this upcoming week that gives you a tell that maybe they're looking at him more as a corner or more as a wide receiver in the upcoming draft?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe if somebody asked Denard Wilson, hey, are you updating your scheme to run a little more zone coverage? And he says, yes, absolutely. We're going to need to. Maybe that's a good sign that they're going to take Travis Hunter at corner. I get it. I watched his tape and I called it boring because every play feels like the same thing. It's just like guys can't run away from Travis Hunter. I think he's a really good anticipatory hip turner. I think he knows what guys are going to do, and they have trouble getting out of their release against him. They have trouble getting away from him. He doesn't allow a lot of big plays. I get it. You watch the tape, and it's hard not to say this guy is the best zone corner in this draft class, bar none. He is a special athlete. But when you talk about scheme fit with the Tennessee Titans and the way Denard Wilson likes these guys that like to do a lot of bumping and punching at the line of scrimmage to disrupt route timing, that sort of thing, pure press man situations, I just don't see Travis Hunter being that guy. But they have a need at wide receiver. And so I could see if the Titans draft him because he is such a special athlete, him making a lot more sense at wide receiver for this particular team. And JT, that's on you. You got to get your notebook, you got to get your pen, get your microphone, you got to find Brian Callahan, and you got to glean that information from him.
All right. That sounds like a plan. Excited to do that. Stoney, I love that question. I'm going to pencil that in. But I think there's more pressing comments or questions, like Team Ramrods, who says he wants to know what that film room smelled like after the month of darkness, or our Borgonzi and Callie, hashtag Team Toxic. The people need to know. No, I agree with you. I think that's one of the biggest tells, right? Now, going a step further, despite maybe not being a scheme fit, does that mean you view his talents elsewhere on this team that could be very needy? Say wide receiver, Like that's
Yeah.
one that I think is going to be super interesting to find out, and we cannot wait to dig into all of that and so much more next week when we are at the NFL Combine. So excited to be there. All thanks to our wonderful sponsors, ML Rose. Got to get out there before I leave. I just have to. I probably will do it Sunday. And there's 7 locations around the Nashville area with an 8th on the way, 25 beers on tap, and a menu that is to die for. Got to check them out. You can go to their website to find a location near you at mlrose.com. And thank you to Sinkers Beverages for sponsoring the show as well. We will be back on Tuesday, probably at our normal time, as Brian Callahan and Mike Borgonzi speak earlier in the day, talking about everything that we heard from them, talking about what they think about Travis Hunter, what they think about the wide receiver class, and so much more. But until then, this has been the Hot Read Podcast. We will see you then. Have a good weekend.